Welcome to Yellow Hibiscus painting tutorial with watercolors. We will cover all the details from start till finish. An outline drawing is done, which is available for download, and with an elastic eraser, removing the excess amount of graphite off the paper. And with yellow flowers, it is super important to remove as much graphite as possible so your lines are super light, super thin. Yellow pigment has this quality that it really is transparent and it makes all the graphite marks visible through lots of layers, even many layers. Graphite will be visible. Now to watercolors that we will be using, starting with Indian yellow. For the second mix, I'm taking a little bit of Indian yellow and adding Sennelier red. A little bit more of Sennelier red. Third mix is Pearl and Maroon, mixed together with a little bit of previous mix that was on my brush, but mostly it is Pearl and Maroon. I will be using also Lemon Yellow, clean lemon yellow. Sap Green on the side of my palette, which will be used in some shadow areas in the middle part, and Pearl and Violet maybe for some extra darkness if that will be necessary. Let's paint out what we have. Indian yellow, lemon yellow, a mix of Indian yellow together with Sennelier red, Indian yellow together with sap green for some shadow area, separating petals, and Pearl and Maroon with a touch of Pearl and Violet. We will see if we will be using that color because it is super dark and super saturated. Be careful with Pearl and Violet. Let's start painting. And as you can see, the middle part, we have a beautiful stem in the middle. I'm not covering that with masking fluid, but I'm painting around that very carefully, watering surface, and be sure that your water is clean after mixing watercolors because we need clean first watery layer. And I'm applying water around that stem that we have in the middle. I'm leaving that without water and going through all the surface, applying lemon yellow pigment, clean lemon yellow, to the whole flower head surface. Usually I paint one petal at a time, but this time I can see that the background color for this hibiscus flower is evenly yellow, and we can paint all petals in one sitting. You can paint each petal separately, no problem, but be sure that your first layer is super transparent, very light. This lemon yellow layer should be very light. Take a look at the watercolor box, which yellow pigment you have. You should be having at least 2 yellow pigments in your, if you have a set or if you bought separately. Indian yellow or cadmium yellow is more warmer yellow color, but lemon yellow, or it can be also bismuth yellow and some other yellow pigment which is cooler. If you place them both together, lemon yellow, Indian yellow, you will notice that one is cooler, other one is warmer. Now we need a cooler yellow pigment for the first layer. It will stay in some areas just as light as it is now. It will be more in the most lightest place on the petals we see from the reference, and you should be looking at your reference very often. This is the main thing with realistic watercolor painting, to really carefully observe your reference photo. And now I'm taking a mix of Indian yellow together with Sennelier red, and while the surface is still moist, it's not super wet, no puddles around, I'm carefully adding with a round synthetic brush this watercolor mix in the middle. We can see that the middle part is super dark, vibrant red, dark red color, and still I'm painting quite transparently. I'm not going 100% strength of the darkness that we have in the reference. but it's very transparent. We are moving gradually, building that saturation gradually. Now I'm washing my round synthetic brush and carefully smoothing towards the lightest, the yellow part, the applied red watercolor mix. You can use, for example, cadmium yellow with cadmium red. You can use Winsor red. There's a lot of red pigments that you can use. If you don't have Senolia red, don't worry. Also, you need to be careful when you are placing watercolors on your paper. I have quite thick watercolor paper, which is 640 GSM, and I can do these few layers in a row because I know that my paper can handle that. If you have a lighter type of paper, you should wait between layers to dry, otherwise paper will not be ready to receive any layer. I added a little bit of Perlin Maroon to the very middle part that we see is much darker, and now with a finer tip brush I'm taking the mix of Indian Yellow and Senolia Red and carefully adding those fine lines. They shouldn't be super fine at this moment. My layer underneath is still a little bit moist, and as I apply with the fine brush strokes those petal veins, they are slightly going into the paper, into the watercolor mixes, and that is completely fine. We are now building background. We are not painting details, we are not going into super detailing. We are now more concentrating on building the base coat, the base layer for this hibiscus flower. We will be painting many layers. This is just the first layer, just the beginning. It will look like a mess, don't worry. This is the part when you are just establishing colors and tonal values. Now please wait a few minutes for the layer to completely dry. After you waited like 5-10 minutes, be sure that your paper is super dry. I'm erasing final outlines that are still visible. And if you are painting transparently, which you should, then you can even erase some graphite lines that are underneath your transparent layer. I applied lemon yellow very transparently, and I can still erase some lines that are underneath that layer. If you painted too saturated, then oops, you can't erase any more of your pigment if it's still visible. That's why with yellow it is crucial to have super light graphite lines, or after first watery layer you can remove. But also when you are erasing, don't push too hard on your paper. Very lightly erase, and I'm wiping out the dust with a bigger brush, so I'm not touching paper with my fingers and not making it maybe messier or dirtier, because our hands get different kind of mess around, so be very careful with that. And now we can paint further. Everything is dry, graphite lines are completely erased and not visible. I am starting with round synthetic brush the next layer by separating petals. Using the mix of Indian Yellow together with Senolia Red, separating one petal with another. As I apply watercolors, after that I wash my brush in water, clean it in paper towel, and smooth the applied layer. And as you can see, petals are separating very nicely, and it instantly gives a more realistic look, more three-dimensional look. We are now working with tonal values, understanding what is darker, what is lighter, how to separate them, but the layer underneath is completely dry at this stage. Now I'm zooming a little bit closer, and as I wait for the petals to get drier, I will work on the middle part. Careful with the very tip of the brush. I'm loading my brush with Perlin Maroon and adding this mix, these watercolors to the middle part. We see in the reference that middle part is super dark, super saturated, and that's what I'm gradually, with the very tip of my brush, adding this layer of watercolors. And as I look in the reference, I'll notice that there are some little details through this middle stamen part visible, shining through the back side, the middle part. So I'm adding with the tip of the brush those little seen through details of the back side of the behind the stamen. Take a look closer in the reference. You will notice that some little darker details are visible through that middle part, and that's what I'm adding with the very tip of my brush. And as you can see, my brush strokes are like a little stippling method. Zooming out, petals are dry, and we can paint further. Now I'm again adding fine lines to petal veins. As I mentioned in the beginning, we will do that. We will layer a lot of layers and building everything gradually. We have a little bit thicker petal veins behind. Now we have a little bit darker, more precise, and that is by layer we're building what we see in the reference. Nothing in realistic watercolor painting is achieved with one layer, even with 2 layers. First, we are establishing the base, then we start to build layers, and after that we are going into detailing. But for now, we need to look deeper behind those details. First, that got our attention in the subject are the details, are those tasty parts that we want to paint. But that really goes into the last part of the painting. Now we are more concentrating on building the back side of those details, the deeper colors that are behind those details. That's why it's important to look at the reference, really study the reference. Not just look, oh, it's a beautiful flower. Look deeper. Which colors you see? What are the color transitions? Here we have it's almost a yellow flower, but we are start to look more deeper, then it looks like more red. Oh, but there's also violets in it, and maybe even some greens in the shadow area. We need to really carefully study the reference. The key to realistic watercolor painting is careful observations of the reference. And our eye is built that way that the more we look, the more we start to see what we haven't seen in the first place. Always open the reference right beside your tutorial on the other gadget or right beside the screen. If you have a tutorial, open the reference. I am placing a reference in the video screen, but it doesn't give the whole look, the very detailed look. When I'm painting one area, I'm really zooming that area closer so I can really understand and see what is happening there. I added a little bit more of Sennelier Red to my color palette, and now with a synthetic brush, adding more Sennelier Red around the middle part. I notice that my painting is too much yellow at this point and not so many reds, but in the reference I can see that middle part has a lot of red in it. So I'm adding a layer of clean Sennelier Red And after applying watercolors with clean and dry brush, I'm smoothing the applied watercolor layer so that the transitions from darker to lighter are gradual. Now I'm loading my brush with Indian yellow, clean Indian yellow, and with round synthetic brush, starting from the darker part of the petal where petals are separating one from each other. I'm applying this very vibrant pigment Indian yellow and gradually moving it towards the light. The lighter part of the petal will have only lemon yellow. The more yellowish this Indian yellow is, more closer to the shadow part of the petal. And as you can see, each petal I start applying lemon yellow from the darker part and push it towards the lighter part. And the lighter part is still super light. We need to have these differences in each petal. Where's the darker part and where's the lighter part? To get a more three-dimensional, more realistic look of, even in the first look, looks like a flat flower in the reference, but it's not flat, and we need to establish these tonal values. Now zooming in a little bit closer, I'm adding to the little corner a little bit of sap green where the lemon yellow pigment is. And the mix, as you can see, is very, very light, and with the tip of the brush, I'm adding from the outer edge little brush strokes that indicate little curves and folds what we have at the outer edge of these petals. Everything is still applied very transparently, and I'm adding this very light sap green mixed together with lemon yellow to the area where the petals are separating one from each other, where the cast shadow area of the petal is casting on the other petal. Applying with the very tip of the brush, washing my brush and smoothing the applied little area of the mix. And later on we will add more layers, more transparent layers. Right now everything doesn't look quite like a reference. Don't get discouraged at this stage. Continue painting, trust the process. If you are painting transparently, you have room to build more and more layers, more and more saturation and three-dimensional look of this flower. adding Perlin Maroon. Not so super saturated that like it is on the palette, but a little bit lighter. We're still painting transparently and building layers gradually. And another layer goes into the middle part. I'm painting around the stamen, which will be painted a little bit later. Now we're building the back view of the flower. And my brush strokes in that middle part are very small, almost like a stippling method, to gradually combine this darker layer into the next layer, which is a little bit lighter. And we see in the reference that there's also this transition from the darker area towards a little bit lighter. The transition is very gradual and smooth and almost like a fluffy. We need to get the same look, the same appearance in our painting. And that is achieved with little brush strokes. Taking Indian yellow with a little touch of Sennelier red and with little brush strokes moving forward in the middle part of the flower. We still need to build that red color, that more saturation and vibrancy of that red part on the hibiscus flower. We see in the reference there's a lot of red. The more we look, the more we notice that the middle part is more redder than it appeared in the beginning. That's because the more we study the reference, the more we start to notice it's not just a yellow flower. There's so many things going on. Carefully with the tip of the brush, separating petals. That separation line is more vivid now, and it all is building gradually. If we will go straight with dark mixes, we will finish with flat looking subject and it will not look realistic. I'm layering different color tones, but doing it transparently. That gives me the room to add more layers, and the more layers, the more richer the subject is looking, more realistic. We have a flat surface and we need to get to viewer to see a three-dimensional subject, but it is flat. So with tonal values, with manipulation of details and layers and different colors, we are making a viewer believe that this is three-dimensional subject. I waited for a minute and two for the layer to be completely dry, and now with the round synthetic brush and Indian yellow, I'm painting another transparent layer of Indian yellow to the whole surface, but I'm gradually starting from the darker area where is the most saturated amount of watercolors on my brush, and then I push towards the lighter part, and eventually brush begins to get emptier, and towards the lighter part of the petal I have lesser amount of pigment in it. So that way I'm gradually making each petal the darker where the petals are meeting underneath the other petal, and then gradually towards the lighter part. As you can see, my brush starts from the darker area of the petal and gradually moving towards the lighter part. We need to have differences in the dark and in the light. Careful with outer edge. We want to have a very neat outer edge in realistic watercolor painting. It's not only the subject, it's important to have it accurately painted. It's also important how is the surrounding area looking. We are painting on the white paper and we are leaving white paper background white. That's why we need to be careful with the outer edges. They should be precise. We don't want any marks outside the subject. Everything is neat and accurate. Zooming closer, and we will paint the stamen and entrance of this hibiscus. I'm also zooming in the reference so I see what is going on here. We see their little stamens, their little anterns, what I'm painting right now, those circle parts that are anterns of the hibiscus flower, and they are slightly darker. I'm taking Indian yellow, and now I'm taking a little touch of Sennelier red and painting around those circles with the very tip of the brush. With these little details, don't rush things. Take it super slowly and paint with the very tip of the brush. Now I'm taking lemon yellow color and with little brush strokes, not super evenly, painting the rest of the part which is still white because we haven't painted it. With little brush strokes, not evenly, so I'm leaving little areas maybe even unpainted. They will be the lightest part of this area. And I will not be painting 100% accuracy that we have in the reference because it's like super small details. But I will try to make an illusion of all those details. Now with the Sennelier red, and I have the Sennelier red on the very tip of my brush, I'm placing little dots. We see in the reference that they are like little hairs, maybe, little particles of those anterns, and that's what I'm placing right now. So I get this feel, this look of all little details happening there, but I will not be painting 100% accuracy that we see in the reference. Now I'm taking sap green and adding little darker space around those little stamens that we see in the reference. Carefully adding, that is like shadow part, a little detailed inner part. Getting a little amount of perylene maroon and smoothing together with sap green, and as you can see, there's something starts to show up, more details, depth, and we see that it starts to look more and more three-dimensional, but I did it only with a few brush strokes. Now with the very tip of the brush, I loaded perylene maroon and I add those little dots around those anterns. I carefully study the reference and try to implement those details in my painting. Now we can paint further. Everything is dry. around on the petals, and I'm adding another layer of Indian yellow to the petals and starting from the shadow area as we did previously. Now a little part hasn't been painted. I'm adding Sennelier red and painting the stamen part in this flower composition. And as we add the layer, it instantly goes deeper into the composition. It's all about tonal values, really. It's not about some magical technique. It's the study of the reference and tonal values. Adding a little bit more darkness closer to the base of the stamen, which is even further. Adding Sennelier red to my color palette and painting flower petal veins at the very middle section where they are a little bit more darker than towards the outer part of the petals. Take a look careful in the reference at the petal veins. You will notice that they are more darker towards the middle part, and then they become lighter towards the outer edge. And I'm adding Sennelier red in the middle part, where's the darker, more reddish area of this flower. And with fine brush strokes, adding Sennelier red, clean Sennelier red. We need more red color in the middle. We definitely need more red color. But that is, we can add more layers, build gradually. As we are painting transparently, everything is possible. Layers by layers, slowly this flower starts to come to life. Adding a very small amount of sap green to the area where I have Indian yellow, and that stamen with anthers in the middle part also have a lighter and darker part, lighter area and shadow area, and that's what I'm doing right now. I'm going over the lower right side, which I noticed that is slightly darker than the left side, because it is also a roundish area and it also has a lighter and darker area. Adding the same mix of sap green together with Indian yellow, very light amount. You can see from my color palette that is super light amount. And again, those little folds, making them a little bit more visible, noticeable. We see in the reference there are little shadow areas from the folds, and that's what I'm painting right now. With the very tip of the brush. And also some brush strokes are with the side of the brush, some brush strokes are with the tip of the brush, and I'm making those brush strokes different. They're not the same all around. One is longer brush stroke, one is thicker, one is shorter, one is thinner. Because we see also in the reference, those folds are different in the form. That's what I'm doing. Also creating this different look of those folds. Checking that the petals are dry, the surface is dry, adding Indian yellow, final layer to this painting, to this yellow hibiscus flower, and I'm finishing up this tutorial. You can paint, and I definitely recommend you to paint some extra 15 to 20 minutes, add more details, more layers. Your painting will only benefit and you will push yourself a little bit further, trying, seeing what you can do more with this painting. I really enjoyed painting this yellow hibiscus during winter time. Felt a little bit more warmth in my everyday life with this beautiful yellow flower. Thank you for watching. Hope you learned something new. If you have questions, write me, comment me, and I will reply as much as I can. I really like to communicate with all you, and thanks for watching. See you in my next tutorials. Bye bye.